Mr. Kenneth Leung will address the Council on the Minority Report on an inquiry into matters about the agreement between Mr. Leung Chun-ying and the Australian firm UGL Limited. Mr. Kenneth Leung.
In relation regarding the signing of agreement between the former Chief Executive Mr. Leung Chun-ying and the receipt of payment by Mr. Leung, the public and legislators have expressed a number of concerns, including the nature of the payment, whether it has given rise to conflict of interest, the system of declaration of interests by the Chief Executive, and taxation issues. In fact, since October 2014, the Legal Council and the House Committee have, in a number of meetings, discussed about the UGL incident. In a council meeting on the 2nd of November 2016, Mr. Andrew Wen and I myself, under Rule 20(1) of the Rules of Procedure, RLP, presented a petition on Mr. Leung's receipt of payment from UGL. A total of 28 members supported the request to refer the petition to a select committee. Under the then Rule 20(6) of the ROP, the petition was referred to a select committee. The Select Committee to inquire into matters about the agreement between Mr. Leung Chun-ying and the Australian firm UGL Limited has compiled a report, the committee report for short. It sets out the work and conclusion of the Select Committee. However, the report failed to detail the following matters. 1. The background of the inquiry into the UGL agreement. 2. Matters relating to Mr. Hon Chau's amendment to the proposed major areas of study. 3. Complaints against Mr. Kenneth Leung, Mr. Alvin Yeung, Mr. Andrew Wen, and Mr. Lam Chek-ting by Mr. Junius Ho. 4. The request for Mr. Kenneth Leung to resign from the Select Committee. For this reason, Mr. Alvin Yeung, Mr. Andrew Wen, Mr. Lam Chek-ting, and I did not sign the committee report. We published a minority report to supplement the committee report and to set out the diverging views from the committee report. I will point out the key areas in the minority report. First, the controversy caused by Mr. Hon Chau during the work of the Select Committee. The Select Committee held a third meeting, has held 3 public meetings on the 25th of April 2017 to consider the proposed amendments made by Mr. Hon Chau on the Chinese version of the revised major areas of study. Mr. Chau submitted his proposed amendment to the Secretariat, which tabled printout of the amendment in the meeting. On that day, the Select Committee did not reach any conclusion on the proposed amendments. After the meeting, the Secretariat, as per established practice, issued a hard copy and the electronic copy of Mr. Chau's proposed amendment to members and relevant staff members under matters arising. It was subsequently found that the amendment could be traced to an author named CEOCE. We think that CEOCE means Chief Executive Office - Chief Executive. As Mr. Leung Chun-ying was involved in the proposed major area of study, we were shocked and found it unacceptable. We think that Mr. Leung, as the subject of the investigation, should under no circumstance interfere with the work of the Select Committee. In fact, the Select Committee sent letters to Mr. Leung asking him to submit information and to attend meetings. However, Mr. Leung provided some documents and explicitly refused to attend any meetings. We point out that on the 25th of April 2017, in an open meeting, Mr. Hon Chau proposed amendments on the major areas of study. At that time, he did not declare his discussion with Mr. Leung on this matter, and the fact that he proposed the amendment as per the suggestion of Mr. Leung. The conduct of Mr. Chow and Mr. Leung seriously misled the Select Committee and seriously undermined the credibility of the Select Committee. According to the committee report, the Select Committee on the 15th of May 2017 held a closed-door meeting to discuss the controversy caused by Mr. Chow. We do not agree with the fact that the Select Committee report refused to set out the details of the closed-door meeting. We think that it is a breach of public interest and their right to know. The public were kept in the dark as to whether the conduct of Mr. Chow is a breach of conduct as a legislator and whether he has undermined the credibility of the Select Committee. But secondly, in relation to this Select Committee, there was an agreement to set up a non-binding arrangement requesting members to sign a confidentiality undertaking. According to the situation at that time, the information held by the Select Committee were not information that required extra measures of confidentiality. If there is, nor was there any change in circumstances warranting an extra measure. In this regard, apart from the confidentiality arrangements under the ROP, setting extra requirement to sign confidentiality agreement may become a precedent which may affect the operation of future Select Committee set up by competition. As a result, Mr. Alvin Yeung, Mr. Andrew Wen, Mr. Lam Cheting, and I myself did not sign the undertaking. Lastly, the work of the Select Committee is obstructed from time to time. The subject of the investigation refused to cooperate. As a result, the committee could not exercise the electoral powers and privileges ordinance, investigation power, and summons power to work. It is difficult for the Select Committee to draw a meaningful conclusion. As a result, we think that Mr. Leung, as the main subject of investigation, his refusal to attend any meeting render the subcommittee unable to find the truth by way of hearing. We find it highly regrettable. And the contact between Mr. Leung and Mr. Chow on this matter makes it difficult for them to make any amendment. We think it's a breach of trust, a serious undermining of the credibility of the Select Committee. We strongly condemn such conduct.
Questions, Shu Ka Chun. Rule 56